And welcome back to Opening Statements. I'm Julie Grant. This morning, we're turning a spotlight on the murder case of a 19-year-old named Cynthia Hoffman and her best friend who arranged her murder. In an exclusive interview, you'll hear from Denali Brehmer, who was catfished by a man who offered her $9 million to commit murder. She recruited some friends, including Caleb Leland, who pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He's going to be sentenced for his role in the crime tomorrow. Court TV's Vinny Politan gives us the backstory on this case.
The water moved silently beneath the cold Alaskan sky. It was the kind of place where nature seemed untouched. A place where towering mountains watched over endless forests and glacial rivers carved their way through the wilderness. From a distance, everything appeared peaceful. But beneath that peaceful surface, a nightmare was waiting to be discovered. When authorities recovered the remains of 19-year-old Cynthia Hoffman from the icy waters of the Eklutna River in June 2019, the details that emerged would leave even veteran investigators struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. Cynthia had not been killed by a stranger lurking in the shadows. She had not been targeted by a violent criminal passing through town. According to investigators, the people responsible were individuals she trusted, friends she laughed with, friends she spent time with. Friends who had shared photographs, memories, and ordinary moments of teenage life. Yet somewhere along the way, friendship had transformed into betrayal. And at the center of it all stood a young woman named Denali Brehmer, a teenager whose life seemed outwardly normal, a teenager who would soon become the focus of one of Alaska's most disturbing murder cases, a case involving manipulation, greed, online deception, and a horrifying crime that began with a message sent through the internet. This is the story of how a vulnerable young woman lost her life, how a dangerous fantasy spiraled into reality, and how a group of teenagers became involved in a crime so shocking that it would capture national attention. Long before the murder investigation began, Cynthia Hoffman was known by friends and family as a kind-hearted young woman with a warm personality. She loved spending time with people she cared about. She enjoyed social media, taking photographs, and creating memories with friends. Those who knew her described someone who wanted to be accepted and loved, someone who trusted easily, someone who often saw the good in others. But Cynthia also faced challenges. She had developmental disabilities that affected aspects of her daily life. Despite those challenges, she worked hard to build friendships and maintain independence. The people closest to her believed she had a bright future ahead. She was young, she was hopeful, and she had no way of knowing that the people surrounding her were becoming involved in something far more dangerous than anyone realized. Among Cynthia's social circle was Denali Brehmer. Like many teenagers, Denali appeared to be navigating the uncertainties of young adulthood. She spent time with friends, used social media, and seemed to enjoy an ordinary life. But beneath the surface, another world was developing. A world hidden behind phone screens and online conversations. A world where reality and fantasy would eventually collide. At some point, Denali began communicating online with a person she believed was an extremely wealthy young man. The individual presented himself as someone with immense financial resources and an extravagant lifestyle. He appeared successful, powerful, almost impossibly rich. For a teenager living an ordinary life, the fantasy was intoxicating. The messages continued, the online relationship deep. And promises were made, dreams were encouraged, and gradually the conversations became darker. What Denali did not know was that the person she was communicating with was not who he claimed to be. The wealthy millionaire was an illusion, a carefully crafted lie. Behind the screen was a man named Darren Schillmiller. Living hundreds of miles away in Indiana, Schillmiller had created a fictional identity, an identity built on deception, an identity designed to manipulate. Investigators later uncovered evidence showing that Schillmiller's communications became increasingly disturbing. The conversations moved far beyond flirtation or fantasy. They entered territory that would ultimately have deadly consequences. As months passed, authorities believed Schillmiller encouraged increasingly extreme behavior. The messages became darker, the requests became stranger, and somewhere along the line, a horrifying proposal emerged. According to investigators, Schillmiller promised Denali millions of dollars if she would commit murder. The amount reportedly discussed was staggering, an unimaginable fortune for a teenager, enough money to change a life forever, enough money to make fantasy feel real. But there was one devastating problem. The money never existed. The millionaire never existed. The entire promise was built upon a lie. Yet by the time that reality would become clear, events had already begun moving toward a tragic conclusion. As investigators later pieced together the timeline, they discovered a series of alarming warning signs. Messages exchanged online revealed increasingly violent discussions. The boundaries separating fantasy from reality appeared to be disappearing. What may have initially seemed like outrageous internet roleplay gradually evolved into something much more dangerous. Friends around Denali became connected to the growing conspiracy. Teenagers who should have been focused on school, work, relationships, and the future were instead becoming entangled in a deadly plan. The discussions were no longer hypothetical. A victim was being considered. Plans were taking shape, and investigators would later allege,
"One thing I know is that my daughter trusted these people. My daughter just wanted friends. Now I have to bury her."
that Cynthia Hoffman had been selected as the target. The choice was particularly devastating. Cynthia trusted the people around her. She believed she was spending time with friends. She had no reason to suspect that individuals she cared about were allegedly planning her death. It is heartbreaking. On one side stood a young woman simply trying to enjoy life. On the other stood a group becoming consumed by greed, manipulation, and a fantasy built on deception. The collision of those two worlds would soon produce a tragedy that shocked an entire state. June 2019 arrived. The long Alaskan summer days stretched across the landscape. For Cynthia, it seemed like another opportunity to spend time with friends. But according to prosecutors, a deadly plan was already in motion. On the day of the murder, Cynthia joined several members of the group for what appeared to be an ordinary outing. There was nothing obvious suggesting danger, nothing indicating she would never return home. The destination was a scenic area near Thunderbird Falls, a place known for natural beauty, a place visited by hikers and tourists, a place where people came to enjoy nature. Instead, it would become the setting for a horrific crime. As investigators later reconstructed events, they alleged that Cynthia was lured to the area under false pretenses. Once isolated from safety, the situation changed dramatically. The young woman who believed she was surrounded by friends suddenly found herself trapped. Authorities stated that Cynthia was restrained with duct tape, bound by people she trusted, unable to escape, unable to comprehend why this was happening. The betrayal was almost impossible to imagine. Moments earlier, she had been among friends. Now she was fighting for her life. According to prosecutors, Cynthia was ultimately shot in the back of the head. The attack ended her life at just 19 years old. A life filled with potential, a life filled with dreams, a life that should have stretched decades into the future. Instead, it ended in a remote area surrounded by wilderness. But the horror did not stop there. After the murder, authorities alleged that efforts were made to conceal the crime. Cynthia's body was transported away from the scene. Investigators later determined that her remains were thrown into the Eklutna River. The icy water carried evidence away from the location where the killing occurred. Those responsible may have believed the river would hide the truth forever. They were wrong, because despite every effort to conceal what happened, the investigation was already underway. And once detectives started uncovering digital evidence, they would discover a trail leading directly toward a conspiracy almost too shocking to believe. The phones, the messages, the photographs, the online communications. Every digital footprint left behind would eventually reveal the terrifying reality of what had happened. And as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered something even more disturbing. The murder was not a spontaneous act of violence. According to prosecutors, it was a crime discussed, planned, and documented. A crime connected to an online catfish operating hundreds of miles away. A crime motivated by a fortune that never existed. A crime that would leave a family devastated and a community searching for answers. What investigators would uncover next would reveal a web of deception far darker than anyone imagined. Digital evidence, secret messages, and a shocking online connection would expose the full truth behind Cynthia Hoffman's final days. In Part 2, we'll follow the investigation as detectives piece together the evidence, uncover the online catfish at the center of the case, and reveal how a promise of millions of dollars led to one of Alaska's most disturbing murder conspiracies. If you're enjoying this deep dive into true crime, make sure you subscribe to Crimevault and turn on the notification bell so you'll be notified the moment Part 2 goes live. If this story shocked you, leave a like, share this video with fellow true crime enthusiasts, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.